everyone, and welcome to another episode of MMT Mondays. What is the best way to approach transforming our society into a more equitable one? On a recent episode of Macro and Cheese, Professor Fadhel Kaboub came on to discuss how instead of pushing for single progressive plans, Professor Kaboub explains that the progressive movement has been so incredibly beaten down that we have been reduced to only hoping to get crumbs at a time. This only serves to hurt us more in the long term. Professor Kaboub views a Green New Deal as a three-layer cake. He views the first foundational layer of the cake being guaranteeing universal basic services such as health, education, green infrastructure, and universal childcare. The second layer includes a federally funded job guarantee program that provides a living wage and full benefits to workers who cannot find employment in the private sector. His third and final layer involves a generous income support for people who can't work or shouldn't work for health reasons or for other reasons overall. Kaboub concludes that this layered approach assures that we truly can create a prosperous society that has the right priorities and is not leaving anyone behind.
And in a panel you and I were on the other day regarding the federal job guarantee, what you did was absolutely masterful, and I'm hoping that we can get you to recreate that for this podcast. You made the mention of why the Green New Deal is a layer cake, if you will. It's a bundle, and it has to come that way because each thing builds off the other. Could you describe the progressive layer cake for the Green New Deal, Medicare for all, job guarantee, just transition, and explain the funding mechanism and why that matters?
Absolutely. Happy to do that. To answer your question, and this is very important because many people in the progressive movement have been beaten down so badly and have lost hope in having something truly transformative. And we've kind of bifurcated our efforts into trying to fight for little bits and pieces that some people are hoping to accomplish at the local level and hoping that eventually the federal forces will take shape. So this analytical lens that we're putting on the table, the modern monetary theory perspective, makes a few observations and a few recommendations. The observations are very simple, that the federal government is the sovereign issue of the currency. It's not constrained in the same way as you and I are constrained, or states and municipalities are constrained. You and I have to work hard, earn an income first in order to spend. We can borrow up to a certain limit, but beyond that, we have to live within our means, so to speak. And the same is true for states and municipalities. They can tax their local residents. They can borrow up to a certain limit. But beyond that, they have to tighten their belts and balance their budgets and pay down their debts. So the federal government doesn't operate in that space. The federal government is not constrained by tax revenues or borrowing capacity. The federal government is constrained ultimately in terms of its spending capacity by the risk of inflation. And the risk of inflation from an MMT perspective comes from two things. One is the shortage or lack of productive capacity. In other words, when we ran out of skilled people, machinery, equipment, resources, if we decide to spend more beyond our capacity, then there is a risk of inflation. And the good news about that risk of inflation is that we know how to deal with it. With strategic investments in education and infrastructure and technical skills, we can increase our productive capacity and mitigate that risk of inflation with strategic planning and create millions of jobs doing that and create millions of green jobs. The second source of the risk of inflation, which is something that brings me closer to the world of Bill Black, is the abusive market power that some key players have in this economy. Think of the pricing power of pharmaceuticals, the pricing power of your telecom companies, of the energy companies, oil and gas companies, the Wall Street companies, and so on. And that kind of inflation price-setting power that they have can't be eliminated with austerity, can't be eliminated by spending less or by balancing budgets. It can only be eliminated when you tax and regulate their market power out of existence by implementing or enforcing antitrust laws, by going after corruption, essentially. So those are the real constraints for the economy. Now, if we understand that, and if we put this lens for the general public to see the world of possibilities, then we realize who's truly standing in the way of Medicare for all, of a job guarantee, of clean investments and green investments and so on. It's not the lack of money that we have access to at the federal level. Then we recognize that it's not really possible for states and municipalities to do all of this transformative stuff. It's really the federal government that has those capabilities. And now, if we believe in the true meaning of democracy, a government of the people, by the people, for the people, then we demand that the 535 people we elect in DC, that they do their job, which is to spend on the national priorities and tax and regulate market power out of existence. Now, spending on national priorities, once we understand this, then here I'm coming to the answer to your question, Steve, which is the 3 layers of the cake as you described it. And this is what the Green New Deal is for me. Number 1, we know that we should and we can afford spending on universal public services, health, education, green infrastructure, universal childcare, you name it. A country like the United States can afford all of those priorities. And we design the implementation programs for these with job trainings and education and the right investments for infrastructure, fully funded at the federal level, not a burden on states and municipalities and local residents. The second layer becomes a job guarantee for people who can find work in the private sector or in the mainline government sector as described in the first layer, and a job guarantee at decent wages and benefits. And then the third layer is generous income support for people who can't work or shouldn't work for health reasons or other reasons. In this way, you're truly creating a prosperous society that has the right priorities and is not leaving anybody behind. So this way, once we understand the power of the federal government to do this, then we should look back at everything we've been doing, shifting all of these burdens and responsibilities on individuals who can't afford it and therefore end up in neglect, and states and municipalities who, by definition, don't have the resources and must race to the bottom to attract a little bit more business, either from fracking companies or pipeline companies or Amazon headquarters or whatever you can get. But that's clearly not a universal solution you can implement across the country. And that's what creates this intensifying dynamic of inequality. And a lot of this inequality is racially infused. And as a result, we have what we have today. So what the MMT perspective does, it shines this bright light on the existing dynamic, and it shows that we have a whole world of possibilities, and at the same time identifies who's standing in the way, be it corporate power or corrupt politicians who have abdicated their power, the power of the purse of the federal government, and are asking local states and municipalities to do this. And then to zoom in on the particular job guarantee piece that you wanted to discuss, Steve, that highlights why we need the whole package, why we can't just do the job guarantee and ignore all the other work that we've been talking about. One of the immediate reactions to the idea of the job guarantee, or a couple of the immediate reactions, will be, number 1, the cost is too expensive. Number 2, for small businesses, they're going to say, well, if you offer a job guarantee that pays a living wage plus benefits plus all of these perks, how can I, as a small business, compete with them? Maybe Amazon can compete. Maybe Walmart can compete. They'll just trim their profit margins at the top and CEO pay and all of that, and they can actually afford it. But for small businesses, it's true. For many, will struggle to compete immediately with the $15 minimum wage or $25 minimum wage plus benefits and so on. And this is where you start looking carefully at the burden that small businesses are facing. Quite a bit of it is actually the cost of healthcare that they have to pay, and the employees also have to pay out of pocket. The burden of FICA taxes on small businesses. From an MMT perspective, we know that the federal government can afford a much more generous Social Security, retirement benefits, healthcare, retirement benefits for everybody. It doesn't really need the tax for it. So this is where you can start arguing for a job guarantee and Medicare for all at the same time, because you can't do one without the other. You have to start unpacking now all the other problems that people who would actually benefit from a job guarantee at the local level, especially in rural areas, will tell you, well, it's great, we have a job guarantee and we have a living wage, but there's no transportation, but there's no childcare, but there's no elderly care, but I'm struggling with a mental health addiction. How do you want me to take advantage of a job guarantee that offers all these great benefits if it doesn't include mental health benefits? So this means that you have to have Medicare for all as part of a jobs package. You can't shift that burden on individuals or businesses or shove it under the rug as if it doesn't exist. So that's why the whole package of a Green New Deal is the transformative thing we've been looking for to address all of these problems simultaneously. Because creating a job doesn't mean that somebody can take that job and push a pause button on their mental health issue, on their transportation problems, on their childcare problems, and wait for another 5 years for somebody to figure out a solution. All of these things need to happen at the same time.
Rather than building a more prosperous society up until now, those in power have chosen to cause millions to suffer under neoliberal austerity politics. By shifting all of these burdens and responsibilities on individuals who can't afford it, the results are neglect and near bankruptcy for states and municipalities who, by definition, don't have the resources to make it happen. The states subsequently race to the bottom in order to hopefully attract a little bit more business and gain a tax base. This option results in intensified levels of racially infused inequality that we see today. So that's why this layer cake package of a Green New Deal is the transformative thing that we've been looking for to address all of these different issues simultaneously. All of these things need to happen at the same time. Otherwise, we end up automatically excluding people who can't be a part of this transformative effort because we're telling them that we're only going to give you one slice of the cake at a time. If you enjoyed tonight's video, make sure to check us out at realprogressives.org and subscribe to get notifications on new video streams in YouTube, Periscope, Facebook, Twitch, and Rockfin. Also, though, if you want to support the work that we do at Real Progressives, make sure to check out our Patreon page, where for only a few bucks a month, you can support our endeavors. Thank y'all, and have a great week.